In the land of Canaan, a vast and arid region, a family prospered under the care of Jacob, the father of 12 sons. Among them was Joseph, a 17-year-old boy full of life and confidence. Joseph was special to Jacob, who loved him more than his other sons. To show his affection, Jacob gave Joseph a richly ornamented robe, a gift that sparked envy and bitterness among his brothers. One day, Joseph had a dream that stirred his spirit. He eagerly shared it with his brothers. "We were binding sheaves of grain in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers were furious, and their envy grew as Joseph shared more dreams of power over them. Joseph had another dream. "I had another dream," he said to them. "This time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told this to his father and brothers, Jacob rebuked him. Though Jacob rebuked him, he kept Joseph's words in his heart, pondering their meaning. If you're enjoying the story narrated in this video, subscribe to our channel to receive the upcoming videos. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending their flocks near Shechem. When his brothers saw him approaching, their envy turned to hatred. "Here comes that dreamer," they muttered. "Let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Reuben, the eldest, intervened, urging them not to kill Joseph, but to throw him into a cistern instead. When Joseph reached them, his brothers stripped him of his richly ornamented robe and threw him into an empty cistern. As they sat down to eat, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants coming from Gilead. Judah, one of the brothers, suggested selling Joseph instead of killing him, and the others agreed. They sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver, and the merchants took him to Egypt. The brothers dipped Joseph's robe in the blood of a goat and brought it to Jacob, claiming that a wild animal had killed him. Jacob recognized it and mourned deeply. Meanwhile, Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Though he was a slave, the Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered in everything he did. Potiphar saw this and put Joseph in charge of his household. However, Potiphar's wife noticed Joseph's handsome appearance and tried to seduce him. But Joseph, loyal to both God and Potiphar, refused her advances. One day, when no one else was around, she grabbed his cloak and demanded that he sleep with her. Joseph fled, leaving his cloak in her hands. Furious, she falsely accused him of trying to attack her. Potiphar, enraged, threw Joseph into prison. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. He found favor in the eyes of the warden, who put him in charge of all the prisoners. Despite his circumstances, Joseph remained faithful and trusted in God's plan for his life. While in prison, Joseph met Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, who had been imprisoned for offending Pharaoh. Both had disturbing dreams the same night, and Joseph, with God's help, interpreted them. To the cupbearer, Joseph said, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position." To the baker, however, he said, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will execute you." And just as Joseph had said, the cupbearer was restored, and the baker was executed. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him and mention his case to Pharaoh when he was restored to his position. But the cupbearer forgot Joseph, and 2 more years passed. Then Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams. In the first, 7 healthy cows were grazing by the Nile when 7 thin cows came up out of the river and devoured the healthy cows. In the second dream, 7 healthy ears of grain were devoured by 7 thin and scorched ears. None of Pharaoh's wise men could interpret the dreams. It was then that the cupbearer remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew in prison who had correctly interpreted his dream. Pharaoh summoned Joseph, and after shaving and changing his clothes, Joseph appeared before him. Pharaoh explained his dreams, and Joseph, with God's wisdom, interpreted them. The 7 healthy cows and 7 healthy ears of grain represent 7 years of abundance in Egypt. The 7 thin cows and 7 scorched ears represent 7 years of famine that will follow. The famine will be so severe that the abundance will be forgotten. Joseph then advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise and discerning man to oversee the land. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him as second in command of all Egypt, saying, "Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." During the 7 years of abundance, Joseph traveled throughout Egypt, collecting and storing vast quantities of grain. When the famine came, it affected not only Egypt but all the surrounding lands as well. People from everywhere came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, including his brothers. When they arrived, they bowed down to Joseph, just as he had dreamed years earlier, but they did not recognize him. Joseph, however, recognized them and decided to test their character. He accused them of being spies and threw them in prison. After 3 days, he released them but kept Simeon as a hostage. He demanded that they bring their youngest brother Benjamin back to Egypt to prove their innocence. The brothers returned to Canaan and told Jacob what had happened. Although Jacob was reluctant to send Benjamin, the famine forced him to relent. He sent Benjamin with the brothers, along with gifts for Joseph and the money they had used to buy the grain. When they arrived in Egypt, Joseph invited them to a meal at his house. Upon seeing Benjamin, Joseph was overcome with emotion and had to leave the room to weep. After composing himself, he returned and continued his plan to test them. He had his silver cup placed in Benjamin's sack and then sent his steward to accuse them of theft. When the cup was found, the brothers were brought back to Joseph. Judah stepped forward and offered to stay as a slave in Benjamin's place, pleading for the boy's freedom. Moved by Judah's selflessness, Joseph could no longer contain himself. He revealed his identity to his brothers, saying, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers were stunned and terrified, but Joseph reassured them, "Don't be afraid. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph embraced his brothers and forgave them. He sent them back to Canaan with provisions and carts to bring their father and their families to Egypt, where they would live in the land of Goshen. When Jacob arrived in Egypt, he and Joseph embraced in a tearful reunion. Jacob lived for another 17 years in Egypt, and when he died, Joseph and his brothers took him back to Canaan to be buried with their ancestors. Joseph continued to govern Egypt with wisdom and integrity. He lived to see his children and grandchildren grow up. When he was nearing the end of his life, he reminded his family of God's promise to bring them back to the land of their ancestors. Joseph's life was a testimony of faith, perseverance, and the belief that God's plans, even when hidden, always work for the good of those who trust in him. Joseph reminded his brothers of God's promise to their ancestors that one day he would bring them out of Egypt and lead them to the land he had sworn to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph made the Israelites swear that when God delivered them, they would carry his bones with them out of Egypt. Joseph died in Egypt, and his body was embalmed and placed in a coffin. His final wish would eventually be fulfilled generations later, when the Israelites left Egypt during the Exodus under Moses' leadership. Joseph's life had come full circle, from a boy with dreams to a slave, to a prisoner, and finally to a powerful ruler who saved many lives. Through all his trials and triumphs, Joseph's faith in God never wavered, and his story became a testament to providence, forgiveness, and the fulfillment of God's promises. If you want to learn all the stories of the Bible, subscribe to our channel, activate notifications. New videos on the channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. May God bless you, and see you in the next video. If you're enjoying the story narrated in this video, subscribe to our channel to receive the upcoming videos.